The following is a presentation by Phil Goodman for Smart Meetings Magazine on the generational mix for meeting planners. It was held at the Grand Del Mar in Del Mar, California on August 31st, 2009.
I'm thrilled to introduce Phil Goodman. I've known Phil for years, and he is just a generational guru, a delight to work with. He's been ahead of the curve on so many things when it comes to this now hot topic that Phil was doing years ago with his boomer marketing and what he has coined the term Genergraphics. If you've ever had the opportunity, he's been a keynote speaker back when it was called IACVB. I met Phil in those days, and he's spoken at so many of our industry keynote top associations. And some of the things I've known him so well, I'm going to read a few things. He's counseled Fox Television, USA Today, Harrah's Hotels and Casinos, New York Life, on both his Genergraphics and his boomer marketing, and that's just to name a few. If you haven't had the opportunity, today is going to be a real treat, so I'm proud to bring to you Phil Goodman.
Thank you. Good morning. This is a beautiful property here in Del Mar. It's so nice to be in my backyard. I live in Carlsbad, so I didn't have very far to go, which is always very nice. It's wonderful to be here on behalf of Smart Meetings Magazine. And before we start, I wanted to tell you that when my partner, Craig Carapello in Hawaii, and I started Genergraphics 5 years ago, it was really meant for sales and marketing, but mostly marketing and advertising. But as it evolved, and when I finally met Steve Lowe from Harrah's up at Lake Tahoe and Harvey's, it evolved into more than that. We actually got into the actual selling of it and how meeting planners and directors of sales can separate their generations and become more efficient and ahead of the curve. The one thing that I hope you come away with today is that no generation follows another in mindset. It's virtually impossible to happen. And the other thing is, one generation will tune out another generation's message, even if they buy the same product or service, no matter what it may be. So what I want to be able to do today is I'm going to play a couple of videos, and the first one will be the 5 generations of the music they started in their youth, because this all started in their youth, between the ages of 12 and 17 years of age. You were locked into that time period from your peer group, and the most biggest change physically and mentally happens in your adolescent stage. What a lot of people don't realize, you bring that mindset with you for your whole lifetime, no matter what. And it carries over in business decisions. And this is what I hope to be able to show you. So we're going to start off today by doing a little music of the 5 generations.
The following will help to depict the 5 distinct generations living in the United States today, and the music they grew up with, which was part of the social circumstances that set these different eras apart from each other. That's not to say that one generation wouldn't like the music of another. However, each generation were the ones who made their own music popular when they were young, and each continues to carry some of the ideology that was reflected in those songs with them today. Remember, there's always an overlap of a few years with each generation. The first music here belongs to the seniors of today. Now we have the music of the forgotten generation.
My generation.
Earth angel, will you be mine?
12 o'clock rock, we're gonna rock around the clock tonight. Put your glad rags on, join me home.
Friends say I'm acting wild as a bug. I'm in love, I'm all shook up.
Next is the music of the baby boomers.
This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. I wanna hold your hand to everything. Turn, turn, turn.
Now we've been home doing 9 to 5.
Are you ready for the music of Generation X?
Every breath you take. Tell us, Commander, what do you think?
I know you're asking me to stay. Say please, please, please don't go away.
Well, if it's good enough to get broke off a proper chunk, I take a small piece of some of that funky stuff. It's like this and like that.
Last but not least, this is what the Echo Boomers are listening to today. style of music and entertainment is part of each generation's mindset that lives with them forever, and their mindset never changes throughout their life cycle.
What we're trying to show you basically is that each generation has their own set of music, their own mindset. With meeting planners, if you were to take and have different functions for different generations that you know were in a group based upon the age groups they were fitting into, you could be that much more efficient and have more of a meeting that will mean something and repeat business for you as well. Because every generation will migrate to the music, to the mode, to the mindset of their own generation. Steve Lowe from Harris, the Director of Sales, has done a lot with Genergraphics, and I think this next video will really explain how to use Genergraphics.
Hi, I'm Steve Lowe, Director of Sales at Harris and Harvey's Lake Tahoe. We have been incorporating Phil Goodman and Craig Carapello's Genergraphic principles into our print advertising and programs since Phil and Craig have shown us that the days of cross-generational marketing are over. Over the years, I have learned to adapt our marketing message to a distinct generational mix. One size no longer fits all. Becoming aware of generational differences in your target markets causes you to look at marketing in a whole new light. Each group is represented by unique cultural interest endemic to their own particular generational positioning. Boomers like 60s and 70s rock and roll. Gen Xers are likely to go for Green Day. It's the echoes we hope to reach with this ad. The graphic shows a cryptic text message as it appears on the cell phone. It's like a foreign language, indecipherable to everyone but the super hip echoes. The headline assures our echo audience not to worry, that we speak their language. But Genergraphics extends far beyond marketing and advertising. Once we have converted a prospect into a client, our sales staff develops a relationship with them based on their generational affiliation. We customize events and services that will appeal to their particular interest during their stay at our property. Regardless of your product or service, today's savvy marketer will ask, who is my audience? Boomers? Gen Xers? Echoes? And design his or her marketing plan accordingly. Remember, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
That gives you a very good idea of how meeting planners can really get into generations, because it's not just the personalities. You can have a person from Gen X and a person from my generation, the forgotten or silent generation, have the identical personalities, but the actual mindset is what carries over. And if you get into the mindsets of generations and really study it and put some time and effort into it, you're going to see that demographics no longer works anymore. You've got to get into the mindset. Do you, as meeting planners, factor in the generational differences when you're planning your meeting or incentive? That is very, very important. Do you consider generational differences when preparing a program, like for sales meetings, technical meetings, hiring of speakers? There's a real big difference of it. You're going to get different generations doing different things at different meetings, and yet it could be on the same subject, obviously, but it's going to be handled differently. How much thought do you give to a generational mix when you're selling a concept to a group, selling an advertising to an associate member, or planning a social function? Social functions can be crucial for your meeting. You don't have to have the same music, the same social. You can split it up. That doesn't mean you have to spend a fortune on it. Just the little things, the ambience of it is going to be a big help when you're doing your meetings. If you don't, you need to know that no generation ever follows another in mindset based upon the social circumstances they were within their youth. And what that means basically is there were different things going on. When the boomers were in their early teens, late teens, and late 20s in the 60s and then going into the 70s, they had different social events and different things going on around them. The same thing with Gen X, the same thing with the Echo Boomer, Gen Y, on this particular level. So when that happens, you have to take a very hard look at it on that way. What is a generation anyway? It's a group of people who can genographically identify and have shared experience, a period of sequential technological development. The forgotten generation. I named it the forgotten generation, my own generation. They call it the silent. The reason for that? We're the teenagers and the children of the 1950s. We're the cool heads that brought rock and roll in. We brought in Elvis Presley. We brought in drive-in movies. We brought in drive-in restaurants. We were the James Dean generation. We had nothing to do with the senior market whatsoever. We're right in between the boomers and the seniors itself. There's still some of us out there in the workforce to deal with that are very well taken if you take a look at them. We were the smallest of the 20th century, but at the same time, we have a lot of influence out there still in the workforce. They're the missing link between the seniors and the boomer generations. The big boom generation, 1946 to 64. The adult teenagers of the 60s and 70s. When I say they're the adult teenagers, folks, they're the adult teenagers. And that never stops. So don't just pass them by in their 50s and now in their 60s, because you got that adult teenager that makes a lot of decisions, has the most disposable income. So don't forget them. Stay away from demographics. Demographics are the ruination of marketing and sales. Remember my words, the ruination of it. Do not count groups together by ages. For the boomer generation, there's a discrepancy between their mind and their body. Boomers know that aging is inevitable, but growing up is optional. See, Steve, I'm hitting a bell here. So I'm in. You like that? Aha. So they are the adult teenagers of the 60s and 70s, right? All right. There is no 50-plus market in the United States. You cannot buy into that. Do you know what 50-plus means? Till you're dead, folks. What else can it mean? 50-plus what? You're going to try to sell a 75-year-old the same way a 50-year-old is? That was cooked up by AARP and the retirement communities. Don't buy into that stuff. There's nothing to do with that whatsoever. No. The boomer woman is the power to be reckoned with. She's 51% of this generation. Also, the Gen X woman is the power to be reckoned with. Sorry, guys, but there's a lot of decision-making with women now than ever before. So you've got to pay a lot of attention to her. She's very important. Gen X, that's the 46 million people born between 1965 and 76. Does anybody in the room knows how Gen X ever got their name? Does anybody actually? How?
It's Doug Copeland's book, Generation X.
Boy, she did it. She did it. Okay. Doug Copeland, Generation X. He wrote a fictitious book. He was the oldest member of Gen X, born in 1965, and he named it after the heavy metal band X. And that's how Generation X ever got its name. Very good.
I'm a Gen X.
I know, but you know what? Oh, no, really? Oh, okay. I'm glad you enlightened me. Hey, I got to tell you something. From all the speeches that I've ever done, and I've spoken many, many years, this young lady is the first one that pegged it. Ever. Very good. Wow, that's wonderful. Anyway, they're the key to the internet and the children of the older boomers. Gen X, they're strongly independent, self-relying, hard-working, creative. If you want to reach Gen X, you must gain their confidence. They've been through a lot of phony ads and different misrepresentations, and they've seen a lot. They've seen a lot of downsizing from their boomer parents and stuff like that. So you've got to really get to them. Gen X, they've been called the MTV generation due to their short attention span. But that's not all too bad. That means you've got to be pretty quick to deal with them. So if you're a Gen Xer, you can actually deal with your own generation. And that gets into little things we'll talk about in a little bit, how one generation can try to communicate with another one. Gen X, they must have a challenge to keep their interest. Right, young lady? Yeah. See? Okay. And at the same time, Gen Xers want new challenges and the opportunity to build new skills. So this generation, even though it's 30 million less than the boomer generation, they've got to be dealt with, and they're going to be out there for a long time. They don't want to spend a lot of time in meetings, so they want to get in, get out, do their work on, and move to next things. And the reason I'm saying that is because if you have a majority of Gen Xers coming to your meetings and you have some boomers at the same time, you should really split your speakers up. I'm telling you, it's going to pay big dividends to do this. The Echo Boom generation. They're called Gen Y, the Echo Boom. The reason they're called the Echo Boom, too, they almost echo the identical number of the original boom. There were 72 million Echo Boomers and 76.5 million Baby Boom generations. And they're the first global generation. When I spoke in France and Finland the last couple of years, it doesn't matter what culture you're from, every country has got the same challenges with generations. So you have to keep that in mind. So when you're dealing with different countries around the world, they have the same type of situation going on as we do. I found that out when I was doing stuff in Europe. The Echo Boomer traits, they're individualistic, self-inventive. They rewrite the rules, killer lifestyle, irrelevance of institutions, celebrates diversity. This generation is the biggest challenge you're ever going to have in your lifetime. So you better get used to Twitter and texting and all this stuff because they don't do well with emails. They've got to be met on their own level. So if you don't, in your organization, have enough of this generation, start thinking about infiltrating this generation as quick as you can because they're the next big powerhouse that's going to be in charge. And they're not going to stop texting. They're not going to stop any of the stuff they're doing now. So even if the oldest one is 33 years of age this year, you can't stop their mindset. So you have to be able to keep that going. They like live marketing experiences. The Echo Boomers must have a compelling reason to attend. They like to participate, interact in an event. They will tell their friends and business associates, so it's got to be a good meeting. For your events, SMS, text messaging will be more effective in reaching them than emails. So you got to keep that in mind when you're doing it. I know this seems like a lot of extra work to do when you're trying to separate generations and everything, but it pays big dividends for you at the same time. Planning separate social functions for the Echo Boomer will appeal more to their lifestyle. So you can do this for all generations. So if you got a couple hundred people, 1,000 people, whatever the amount of the meeting is, separate everybody. Separation is the key to the generational mindset itself. This will not adversely impact the activities you plan for other generations attending. We have proven with case histories that if you appeal to one generation at an event, it will not turn off another one as long as you have something for each generation. Okay? And generations can overlap by a couple of years either way. And I can't say that every boomer thinks the same way, every Gen Xer thinks the same way. However, anything above 51% in market research is the majority. And the majority is our research that we do on these subjects. How can you hit the target of 3 different generations? So when you look at 3 different mindsets, let's say, for example, you're looking at 25 to 54 years of age, covering 3 generations that are going to be in your meetings. You got the Echo Boomers, you got the Gen Xers, and you got the Baby Boomers. You can't hit the target because you got 3 different mindsets. It doesn't matter if they buy the same product or service or in the same industry. What happens when we were doing our testing at Harris a few years back, we saw that by taking demographics away and going into Genergraphics of the mindset, you had almost a 67% increase in your penetration of being effective with a generation itself. When we did our testing at Lake Tahoe, we had almost 100 people do the testing. They were showing different, which I'll show you, different charts, and they were showing different words as well as illustrations and pictures. And they had 51 baby boomers testing. They had 20 Gen Xers. They had 23 of my generation, the forgotten. And here's what happened. This really, really proved what we're talking about. If you're looking up there at Lake Tahoe, you're looking at the first set right there on the left, the middle, and also on the right-hand side. Now, if you look on the left side, you'll say, well, here's gray people pulling slot machines. Boomers don't play slots, folks, okay? My generation does, and the seniors do. So what's the words got to do with it, okay? Well, let's see now. The words, out-of-sight slots, buffets, fun-filled tours. This is Harris Experience that will put you on cloud 9. Out of sight and cloud 9 are right out of the 50s in my generation, okay? You go into the second one here, and it says, for a groovy nightlife, world-class stuff and everything else, and you're far out dining, then you're talking about a different generation. Far out, that's a boomer word. I know it sounds corny, but psychologically and subconsciously, if boomers and Gen Xers and everybody in generations haven't heard those words in years, subconsciously it's been proven it's going to resonate at the same time, okay? Then you got the Gen Xers. If awesome pleasure is your game, check out these sweet deals. Awesome and sweet. Those are Gen X words, right? So what you do is you put it with the illustration part. Now, this showed here when we looked at what Harris and Harvey's were featuring for this generation, great slots and great games. On this one here, we saw the boomers playing dice out there. They play blackjack. They play dice. They don't pull slots. But Gen Xers, they were out there playing, but they were out there boogieing. And the reason why you see it more blurred, this is on our website, is because they relate to things going faster. So if you notice, if you ever go to our website, you'll see on this illustration, what happens is it goes slower for my generation, then it goes a little bit faster with the boomer, and then it really speeds up with the Gen X at the same time. We showed that 75% of the people tested there picked their own generation, and of the 24.5% that didn't were within 2 or 3 years of another generation. Separating generations at the same event will give you the competitive edge, and that's really what you've got to be able to do. Generations will gravitate to activities and entertainment according to their mindset. So it really helps you get the competitive edge when you're doing these generations. Generations events, planning will increase your repeat business because they'll see that there's something different. In these challenging times of the downturn of the economy right now, it really pays to do that extra little stuff for people you're trying to sell for your event, because you got to make it more interesting. You got to give them more compelling reason to really want to come and do it. And I think that if you look at the generational differences and you say, well, how can this possibly be? They're both in the same industry. They're selling the same product. Well, there's a major difference in when you're looking at it, you know. If you look at the boomer generation, when I say they're the adult teenagers of the 60s and 70s, can you imagine a boomer man taking his girlfriend or wife to the movies, flashing an ARP card for a $3 discount, and wanting a romantic evening 3 hours later? I mean, if you just look at that one part alone, you'll see that it's a different situation. Pay attention to the boomers as well as the Gen Xers. Too many people are letting go of the boomers too early. This is one of the biggest things and biggest challenges for all industries around the country. Genergraphics, a competitive edge for meeting planners. You know, when we talk about competitive and being on top of it with generations, how many baby boomers are in the room right now? Can you raise your hands? Boy, a lot of boomers. How many Gen Xers? Wow. How many echo booms? All right. See, you've got a mix. You've got a mix. Sure, the echo booms are still young. They're still coming up, you know, because your mainstream is your boomers and your Gen Xers here. But at the same time, you have to be able to look and say what is going to be appealing to them. When Steve asked me to speak on this yacht cruise over in Long Beach that he had for meeting planners, it was really interesting because he had different food and different music for every generation. We cruised around the Long Beach harbor, but it really showed the major differences. It doesn't mean you have to be that on target and say, hey, this is for boomers only, this is for Gen X. You don't have to single any generation out whatsoever. They will gravitate to the mindset that appeals to them at any given time. Okay? How about some questions? You want to ask me some questions? The microphone's going to come your way here. If we can grab a mic, you'll be able to hear it better, and we'll go from there. Please feel free. Any kind of questions that you want to ask, now's the time to do it. This young lady here. Okay? Yes.
I have a question. Given the economy, the state of the economy in the world, how do you find that the boomers, right, will probably be staying around a bit longer because retirements perhaps were taken to, they're going to be in the workforce a bit longer. I know of a few people that were going to retire and are not. How do you find them working then with the echo boomers and then the younger generation?
What do you mean working with each other or
well,
planning an event
I see
with them?
that because retirement is not an option for a lot of people right now, they're going to be staying around longer. And then the younger generation from the echo boomers, they're going to have a lot more interaction.
Well, what happens basically, you're right, the boomers are going to be sticking around a lot longer, but it was even way before the downturn of the economy because the boomer generation were not savers like their senior parents, so they spent a lot of money when they were younger, and they're going to be in the workforce a lot longer. Even after this recession is over, they are definitely going to be out there. As far as their relationship with the echo boomer, because you got the Gen X in the middle of it, okay? But as far as their relationship with the echo boomer, it's kind of like a dual-edged sword. Let me put it this way. The boomers did not want the generation gap to happen between them and their children that happened between them and their senior parents, so they kept them closer. But what happened was they spoiled our children. My goodness, you'd show up to a Little League game and get a medal just for showing up without even winning. Well, think about it. Does it resonate to a few of you out there? Well, that's what happens, okay? But what happened was, what's happening now is when the echo boomers are out there in the workforce, they're a whole different language, they're a whole different mindset. And even though they get along with their boomer parents, that's their parents and that's their family, which most of them will stay close to. But in the workforce, that's a major, major challenge. So what I'm always suggesting is that companies should take a very hard look at getting people into middle management as fast as they can from this generation in order to do it. And you don't have to talk the exact language of a generation to them. You just have to try to understand them. It's more important that you understand generations than how you speak to them. But if you understand generations and really get into it, then you're going to be able to be that much further ahead of the game, because then you'll say, well, I don't want to take this personally because this is the way this generation is. Not that everybody are just drones, you line them right up and they're all alike. They're not. But if you look at the majority, this will help quite a bit, okay? Questions, please. Let's get this gentleman a microphone here so everybody can hear. Yes, sir.
To tag on to Deborah's question, really when I look at this, the boomers are staying around longer, so how do we create opportunities for the upcoming generations to stick with our organizations, to challenge them, to give them enough to do while this timeline seems to be stretched out a little bit more?
Good question. The basic thing is you bring them more into the fold based upon your involvement with them. Most echo boomers feel in the workforce that people aren't paying enough attention to them. And it's not that they're just all spoiled and their parents did this, but if you get them more involved in decision making and give them a little longer time to gain the knowledge and the experience of what you're talking about, you can slowly infiltrate them into your workforce. And this is going to mean a lot of difference if you do. Yes, the boomers are going to be sticking around a lot longer, but they were going to be sticking around a lot longer, like I said, even before the recession. But the bottom line is you need to be able to train these people, because they're going to have to train other people of their generations, and it's going to be this generation that's the next big wave. So in order to overcome what you're talking about on this level, you need to be able to understand them, and you got to be able to give them more of an experience, and you got to make them feel like, hey, this is an important thing for your career, because they do a lot of job hopping too. They drop out of situations. They're a big challenge. There's no question about it. So you have to work extra hard on this generation to do it. A lot of times you just got to bite your tongue and look at the big picture. I hope that helps you a little bit. Questions, please. Want to give that lady a microphone, please?
More and more, I've come across a lot of young people, I would say more Echoes than Gen X, who really have no country alliance. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? They've traveled a lot, they're traveling more and more. They said, if I don't like here, I'll go wherever. Or they've been trained, they may be first or second generation, and they say, well, I'm going to go back to India, or I'm going to go back to Mexico and make my stand. And where it doesn't seem like that's a majority of the population, that group is growing larger and larger.
Well, that brings up a very, very good point, because as I showed just a little bit earlier, the Echo Boom, or Gen Y, is the first global generation in world history. And like I said, when I was in France and Finland, we found that out from different cultures at the same time. And so if you really look at what you're talking about there, yes, they do have a country. There's no question about that, okay? But it's not just saying I'll go to another country. It's saying I'll go to another job, or I'll try something different, or I'll move to another state, or whatever the case may be. It's not just based upon the country. It's based upon them job hopping. It's them saying, hey, so somebody else will appreciate what I'm doing, whatever, that kind of thing. This is where you have to make a conservative effort in the workforce, seriously, ma'am, in order to really get to them. They can be trained, but they got to be trained in their own way, and it takes a lot more patience. It was easier to train the boomer, it was easier to train Gen X, but this generation threw a monkey wrench into human resources as anything else. Well, I'm not knocking it, I'm just being honest. I'm sure you've been faced with a lot of this out there themselves. But if you take the time with them, there is no shortcut to this generation. And your motivation is quite simple. They are the next big wave coming in, and they're a wave that's going to be a powerhouse to reckon with. And it's not that Gen X won't count, and it's not that the boomers are going away soon, but this is the generation you've got to motivate to plant their feet. It's not easy to do. I wish I could tell you a quick fix moment. Does that answer your question there? You want to hand that lady a microphone, please? Yes, ma'am.
So what are some things that you'd suggest to bring this generation in, and some strategies or mindsets? Like, what are some specific things that you'd recommend for working with this generation?
Okay. Some of the things that you can do basically, if you don't have in middle management or upper management any of the are you talking about if you already got some in there or nobody in there?
Well, in any case.
Okay, in any case. The best thing to be able to do, first of all, is study up on a generation to start with, seriously speaking. Do some real research on it. You go on the internet, there's tons of research on different generations. Doesn't mean they're all accurate, but just go on there and study it. There's books out there, and it doesn't mean you can learn everything at one time, but just where they're coming from. So in order to bring them into the fold, and that's what you're talking about, right? In order to bring them in and to really plant their feet there, they've got to be made to feel even more important than the job may be. You've got to realize this generation thrives on praise, big time. That's a major, major point of their mindset, because they've been praised all their life since they were kids. I mean, overly done. If you really stop and think about it, this generation, look at the influence as small kids they've had on their boomer parents in different household decisions, vacations, cars, homes, everything you can think of. The kids always came first. And this is not that the seniors were bad or my generation, but they were brought up into this kind of thing. And if they weren't, they had friends that were brought up into that. So they just figured, well, it is what it is, and the world will fall in when I'm ready to fall into it. So that's the reason why you've got to give them more praise. You've got to take more time with them and groom them. The faster you can get this generation into middle management, the better off you're all going to be, seriously speaking. I hope that helps you a little bit. Questions? Let me get the microphone, sir. No, what I'm saying, sir, what I'm saying is get them into middle management. Don't start them at middle. Oh, yeah. They'd love you to start at middle management. Are you kidding? They'd like to take your job and be president and owner of the company. No, what I'm saying, sir, is you start them off at entry level, but get them into middle management as soon as you can when you're working with them, because it'll pay big dividends, because it'll be that middle management that's going to make your life easier for the next wave. You got to remember, you still got some of this generation that are teenagers.
But I managed a team that had 7 boomers.
Okay.
They all got it. I'd say a quote from a movie and they'd get it. And then I had 2 echo boomers that just couldn't. I spent more time with them than I did with the rest of the team, and I couldn't wait for them. I needed some production. I needed them to.
Well, okay.
So
the bottom, yeah, but see, here's the catch-22 to that, sir. No matter what you look at, yeah, that's what I'm saying. The echo booms or Gen Y are going to need more time. So I know you need production, but at the same time, it's going to take more hours of your time to groom these people. There is no quick fix with this generation. This is the most difficult generation in the workforce today. So even though you need more production, don't give up on this. Well, I mean, unless these people just aren't producing and they're terrible.
And it makes sense after listening to you that their resumes, they jump all over the job. They
Oh,
leave
sure.
after it, and I'm wondering if they're having a hard time finding a place where they're working.
In their mind, they don't think it's a hard time finding a place. They think the place they're at's having a hard time recognizing their talents. Well, that's true. That's what happens. So if you look at it in that line of thought, is what I'm trying to say. It'll still pay big dividends for you in your production.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I wish I had a quick fix for you.
No,
but that's exactly where it's at.
Yeah, it's tough.
Okay, let's get that lady a microphone over there, please.
Hi.
Hi.
I often think that what we do anyway is adult babysitting. A lot of times, I mean, that's all we're planning and keeping them occupied. And what I find is that the younger generation, especially, and I feel so old saying this, is they like to be empowered to come up with their own answers. So oftentimes when you have a movie that you choose different endings, if you empower them to choose their own endings, it turns out a lot better, and you might have better results instead of you trying to do all the work, to empower them to be able to make their own decisions, come up with their better ideas, and then move forward that way.
Right.
So
That's not a bad idea.
my question to you is, what's the next generation? What are these teenagers coming up like? Is there a name for them yet? And what's
Yes, there is. They're the millennium generation. People get the names mixed up with millennium to the Gen Y or the Echo Boomers. Just let me back this up for 1 minute. What designates a generation is the rise and fall of birth rates, okay? There were 55 million seniors, 28 million of my generation, then 76.5 million boomers. 1965, birth control came in, and Gen X dropped 30 mil. Then right after that, the boomers, women that were putting off having children for their career, started having babies, second and third marriages, and the boomers have the highest divorce rate in U.S. history. So there's more second and third marriages, there's more shared custodies of everything like this going. This is what really started it. But in answer to your question, what you have to be able to do is you take little baby steps with them. You have to, no matter what, because they feel that they have all the answers, and they feel basically that if they're misunderstood, that's your problem, not their problem. That's what you have to be able to look at when you're looking at this particular generation. You got to remember, folks, this generation hears a much different drummer. You know why? They shot the drummer when they were kids. That was it, cut and dry. That's what it means to. I hope that helps you a little bit.
Yeah, sometimes I feel outsmarted by my 5-year-old, and it's
Hey, believe me, my grandkids helped teach me the computer, for goodness sakes, or I can't Twix very good. That's not my forte, but anyway, microphone? Yes, ma'am.
So on the flip side of things, as a Gen Y or Echo Boomer, how would you recommend us dealing with our colleagues and working effectively in the workplace with an aging workforce, or, whatever?
No, that's okay.
No, that's exactly what you said. I mean, for us, the gap is also bigger, and I was just going off the presentation.
No, it's okay. You don't have to explain. I thoroughly understand.
I mean,
these people out here, I know they all understand. No, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I mean, just from an advice perspective, we might be texting all the time, or multitasking, or not multitasking, whatever you want to call it. But we also want to do well in the workforce and try to hold the job down, and progress. But we want to kind of
Otherwise,
bridge the gap a little bit.
What does your
do you recommend
generation
that we
do with the other generations?
Exactly, yes.
Okay, yeah. What if that's what you're saying?
Well, how do you recommend that we communicate with them better? Maybe we don't realize that we're making the communicating.
Okay. The bottom, that's a good question. The bottom line to this is that if your generation, your Echo Boomer, wants to communicate with Gen X or the baby boom generation basically out there, you have to understand that if they have a different mindset, which they do from your own generation, your words, your mindset of way you're doing isn't going to be the same. So as a Echo Boomer, you need to slow it down a little bit if you're very sincere about your job, your career, where you're going with the company, and you have to understand that they also hear a different drummer, and that if they don't communicate well with you, then you need to sit them down and say, can you explain what this means? And this is where the word comprehension is so crucial in the industry itself. Does this mean to you what it means to me? If not, let's agree to disagree. In the case of generations, it is crucial, especially for your generation, to look at people and talk to them and say, what does this mean? And on and on and on stuff. And if they can't explain it to you, then you could be in the wrong place. But they should be able to explain it to you. And then that, to me, that means when one generation is trying to communicate with another, they need to slow it down in order to understand better. And make sure that you don't just say, oh yeah, I understand, or whatever the case may be. Don't rush it. The generational mindset has to be slowed down to bridge the gap. Too many people for too many years depended upon demographics of saying you turn a certain age, you do this. You turn a certain age, you do that. That's no longer true whatsoever. So I hope that helps you. If you do it, it's going to help you. It should anyway. Questions? You mean to tell me I've answered all your questions? 100%? Okay, we have one right here for this lady.
this is getting a little bit off of the meeting planning, but in my position, I also manage a fleet of 300 vehicles. I do have some of the echo boomers. How
Okay.
do how do I communicate to them that they can't text, that they can't do this instant communication while they're driving? That is
It's real easy. Show them their insurance car policies. No. How do you communicate with them not to do it? Okay. What you're really looking at is sitting down with them actually one-on-one, not as a group. Okay, I mean, if you have that many people, but you know, as you go through with them itself and explain to them what you're trying to do. Don't criticize, especially this generation, ever. This would be a terrible way to ever try to get through to them. I mean, nobody likes to be criticized from any generation, but this generation will just shut their hearing aid off instantly, no matter what. And you'll just be lip service, and that's all it's going to be. But if you take the time and explain the validity of what you're talking about, instead of saying don't, and I'm not a psychologist, but if you know, instead of don't Twix or don't text message and on stuff, show them the value of time and how they can gain more for their career, and they can be ahead of the game by doing it. Show them the positive side rather than just saying, you can't Twix do this, you can't do this to this, you can't do this to this, okay? And then after a while, if any of them aren't really listening, then they're not that serious about their job with you. But to me, that would be the way to do it, but do it on a positive note, okay? Right here for this young lady. I like to have the microphone so everybody can hear this.
I
Yes,
don't
ma'am.
really have a question, but someone raised the question about how to work with the millennials and the echo boomers, and my advice is give them the creative jobs because they're highly creative and they're very fast. They're not really good at task thing, like their attention span's a little short on that, and they and they don't take guidance really great, but they're very creative. And being a Gen X, I have a good big vision, but if you give them all the social media, the Facebook, everything like that, they far exceed your expectations, and they're a very creative generation. And we have a whole social media. I work with Banff Lake Louise Tourism. We have a whole social media division in our office, and they're great. Like they do things like it's amazing what they can produce in like a half day, and really, really creative. Give them those jobs because they can just kind of run with it, and you don't need to micromanage them, and they get to feel like they're moving ahead.
That's great. Can I take you to my next section? Boy, she does great. Gen Xer, all right. No, that's very, very true, though, seriously. Is there any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Well, she's talking about the Twitter and all the social networking, and they've been saying that we should introduce that into our programs. I work for Boeing. Our executives are probably boomers. We may have an executive meeting. And I'm also a boomer, and I'm not convinced that everybody sitting there working on their BlackBerry is listening to the program. And so I went to a production meeting the other day, and everything kept showing up on the screen, and it was really distracting. Everybody's really dumb questions, funny things back and forth, and they showed it on the screen. And to concentrate and really listen to the meeting, are they really multitasking that well to be doing both? Our executives make everybody put their BlackBerries away, but then we can't introduce, that the Twitter and everybody's answers on their BlackBerry because we told them to put it away.
Our research basically shows that this generation is multitask, and they can do different things at the same time. There can be too much of anything, obviously, but basically, I can't say that they're not paying that much attention. I think, like this young lady said here, they're very bright, and they want to be challenged more than anything else. And if you challenge them on a positive note on this, rather than worrying about what they're texting or twixing or whatever it may be, you're still going to get better production out of them. It's time. It's very time consuming. Like I mentioned, there's no shortcut to it, but it's so worthwhile because of the size of this generation. And you got to remember that each year, 4 million of them are turning 21 as we go through the whole generation. 4 million a year are turning 21 years of age, and the oldest is 33. So you have to be able to say, this is what I'm dealing with. But if this is any consolation, the same twixing and tweeting and all the stuff they're doing now, they're going to do when they're 50 and 60 years old. And nobody's going to stop doing what they're doing from their mindset of their generation. Yeah, there'll be different technology, but they'll still talk their own language. And they're going to feel that the next generation coming up and the one after that is so far removed. They're in space cadets somewhere else. And they'll say, gee, what was I like when I was younger? Well, ma'am, think back when you were a boomer in your youth and think what the seniors thought about it. Think what people thought of rock and roll music and the devil worshiper and all this other junk that went on. Think about what they thought of Elvis Presley. You know, it all passes on a different thing, but that's a matter. But your generation just needs to take more time and give them, like something this young lady said, more creative. Take the time, and you're going to get better results. How are we doing on time? We okay, Marin? Okay. Well, folks, we got to wrap it up. I'm up here to answer questions for you. Thank you, and thanks Smart Meetings for having me here.
Thanks a lot, Phil. Great presentation.
You have been watching Phil Goodman's presentation on the generational mix for meeting planners. For more information, visit us on the web at genergraphics.com.